So just to follow up on a couple of points that Dorian had for it. The first is where could this make sense for someone as part of their money? So for some clients, it could be a way of having, I'll call it legacy money or final expense money kind of set aside for it. Or maybe there's, you don't qualify for life insurance or something like that. You can have money set aside for it. You know it's going to earn a certain amount of money each year for it. It's just kind of set there to be used for whatever the purpose might be. The second might be if there was a lump sum purchase or something that you were looking at down the road. So if you were you wanted to buy a new car down the road, it might be saying, okay, well, my car right now I have, but I'm going to set money aside now so that 5 years from now when this car needs to be replaced or so, I've got a bucket of money just kind of set aside, and I know it's going to be there. I know it's going to be, at worst case, a certain dollar amount in it, right? So those could be two reasons why to have some money. These accounts would not be for money that is any type that you'd want liquid, meaning that if you might need to get into it, or the emergency money or something like that. These would not be an appropriate area for it because of the potential penalties in that you could have to incur if you were to take the money out. So it truly is money that basically, I don't want to say it's not forever money, but basically it's money that you're not really going to be touching for a longer period of time. So again, it can make sense for some of those kind of ancillary things. We're trying to set money aside. Maybe there's a vacation or something that's coming up that you'd like to say to come in and that for it. So you could certainly try and get that set up for it, Mr. Behemoth. So you can certainly set different dollars up. Mr. Behemoth, there's a spot right here for both. So there's different ways to be able to use the account. But the idea being is obviously on these dollars, they would be monies that you're not necessarily going to touch or going to use for a period of time, right? Just like any other CD for it. But because they are typically 5 years or 7 years of length for it, it's something that there definitely is a time commitment in that. The interest that you do receive from the account is taxable. So just like any other, unless it's in an IRA account and that for it, if it's not an IRA account, then just like any other, any other account that you have that pays monthly interest or annual interest for that for it, you are going to get a 1099 to tell you that you have X number of dollars of interest that's owed on it. If you were to liquidate a portion or any of the CD prior to its maturity time and you did have receive less money than you put into it, then at that point in time you would have a capital loss for it, not advocating losses, but that's just the facts of it. You would have gotten less than what you put into it, so as such you would have a capital loss that you could potentially take off on your taxes. So that's just how the mechanics basically make up this.
You get a 1099 upon you taking the funds out, or 1099?
So the question is, do you get a 1099 every year or just when you take the funds out? That could be twofold. It could be yes, if you get an annual income, so let's say it's paying 1.5%, it pays you, again, let's pay $1,000 as the interest in that for it, you would get a 1099 for that $1,000. If you have one that doesn't mature for the 5 years, and you get paid a lump sum, so to speak, at the 5-year period, you wouldn't pay the tax on that until you've actually incurred the interest or the gain on it, and at that point in time, you get 5 years down the road, you get the tax bill, so to speak. Any other questions with regard to that for it? So just as a kind of a follow-up on it, there was an article, this is from April 11th. You probably know the village of Harvey, not too far from here for it. So village of Harvey, this is April 11th. Chicago suburb of Harvey to lay off police and firefighters. Right? So you may have heard this on the news or read it in the paper or that for it. So basically what the article is talking about is that that the suburb is laying off firefighters and police officers due to financial troubles precipitated by pension woes. So evidently there was a change in the law for Illinois that says that if a company or municipality has not paid into their pension appropriately and therefore that the state has the ability to basically confiscate any of their tax revenues that they would have. So essentially in this case, the Illinois Controller's Office withheld roughly $1.4 million to cover the shortfall in the pension. Now, the problem with that is when that occurs, is that there's now $1.4 million less to be able to be used for essential services, right? So, that means there's 1.4 million less to be able to use for roads, that's be able to use for parks, education, you pick whatever project or whatever that's there for, right? So there's this kind of tug of war right now going on between kind of funding the pensions and being able to basically continue to keep essential services and that going. So there's another article that says, as states try to prop up their pension systems, it means less money available for core government services, such as education, public safety, and parks. Right now, with the states, there's a record roughly about $4 trillion in 2016. They had about 2.6 million of assets available to make those. There's $1.4 trillion gap for it. States such as California and Illinois, usually the courts will try and step in, but if the old adage, you can't get blood from a turnip if there's nothing there for it, right? Colorado, Connecticut, Illinois, Kentucky, New Jersey had less than half of the assets they needed to meet their obligations according to the report. Only Kansas had contributed more money to its pension system in 2016 than it had paid out. So one state out of 50 had actually paid in more than what it actually needed to keep it going there for it. In New Jersey, actuaries say it will take about $6 billion a year in contributions from the state to shore up its pension system. Wow. It's taken years to get less than half of that amount in the current budget. So basically in their current budget, they have roughly about $3 billion, I understand, to be able to, that they're applying for pension. The actuaries are saying that they need 6 just to be able to meet their pension obligations. Right? So it means that what you've seen is that they've relied more on investment returns, which are great when the markets are going well, but when the markets turn and we get into markets that aren't necessarily always rising, you get into a situation where there could be problems with it. The unfunded liability in the state of Illinois in the retirement system has risen in 11 of the past 12 years. So that means over the last 12 years, 11 years it's continued. And that's despite a roaring stock market and steadily increasing contributions, right? So it's $8 billion in Illinois. Its unfunded liability quadrupled to roughly $123 billion. Okay. Unfunded liabilities are expected to rise from just under $20 billion in 1995 to $70 billion in 2034 before dropping. The actuarial 2016 unfunded liability of $123.8 billion is 2.5 times the predicted $50 billion under the Edger administration. Right? So they were expecting it would be roughly $50 billion. It's roughly $123 billion right now in unfunded liability. Right? And basically the returns what they were basing those on were roughly an 8.5% return. They reduced those expectations down to 7%, which has driven up the unfunded liability by another $35 billion. The gubernatorial hopeful J.B. Pritzker said that the state would borrow another $10 billion to fund it. So we haven't paid off this credit card yet, so we'll get another credit card over here and borrow that money off of that credit card so we could pay this credit card over here. Anybody see a problem? So and the other problem with it is the critical difference nowadays is the argument that in Illinois, credit today is much worse than it was in 2000 when Edgar left office. And the stock market is up near a high rather than near a low in that port. So you get kind of the perfect storm where Illinois, to borrow money, has to pay higher interest rates, kind of like being a good driver. If you're a good driver, your driving rates are low. If you're a bad driver, your insurance rates are high, right? So in Illinois, given our current financial situation in that port, we have to pay more in interest than a state that would be in a good financial standing because they're concerned they're not going to get their money back for it, right? So that has to do basically with kind of where in Illinois with the public system, pension system is like, again, just using my wife as an example, TRS funded roughly at 42%, and now for it, if that is not fully funded, then she's not, even though they take 9% of her out of her paycheck every pay period in that for it, there won't be money there essentially for her retirement area. So just something, the other part it also could mean is that there's been discussion in Illinois, right now in Illinois, any retirement income, so income from Social Security, pensions, annuities, IRAs, 401ks, any of those type of things, they are not taxed at the state level, right? So if you were working, W-2'd, 1099, you have to pay income tax on that money. As soon as you change over to receiving pension, called pension income in that for it, that is not taxed in the state of Illinois at this time. That amount of tax, they did a calculation last year when they raised the state income taxes in that for it. If they were to tax those benefits, that is roughly $3.5 billion. Okay. So if the state continues on the path, I'm not saying they're going to raise taxes or tax that portion for it, but if the state continues on the path it's on, I'm not sure what other potential options they may have. Yes?
You said it would be 3.5 billion?
Roughly $3.5 billion, yes.
Probably less than that, because if they introduce that, people are gonna leave.
Well, I didn't say there wouldn't be ramifications. I just said that's there. I mean, the reality is, I mean, if they were to do it, there would be a certain percentage of the population which would leave, right? I mean, because there would be no necessarily a reason to stay here, which could mean that could exacerbate property values, right? So if people are leaving, then there's more houses for sale than maybe people coming in. And Illinois has lost population every year, I believe, for the last 10 years. I think Chicago last year Chicago itself lost on a net of roughly 13,000 or 20,000 people left Chicago, not just the state. And I believe last year you had roughly the city of Peoria leave, the population of Peoria, leave Illinois. So that was roughly 40,000 people. And that has been a trend that has been continuing over time. So yes, if they were to raise taxes or change the tax law on it, those who could leave, so if you were a snowbird and you had a place in Florida, you might say, well, I'm selling the house here in Illinois, the kids can come visit us in Florida, right? But if everybody starts to do that, then you have houses that all around the market at once, and nobody coming in to buy them, so you could see, you know, it's low supply and demand, too much supply, not enough demand, and you can see prices for housing go down, right? I'm not saying that's gonna happen, I'm just saying that that's a potential, just given if those are unforeseen circumstances, right? Could that happen? The answer is yes. Is it going to happen? I don't know at this point in time, but it's something, I'm sure that's one of the reasons why they haven't looked to potentially increase it, right? So those of you who are on private pensions are not immune to the situation. So this was an article on the Bakery and Confectionery International Pension Fund announces a tool to repool the proposal. The bakery and confectionery industry has been underfunded for years, and actuaries are estimating that the B&C fund will become insolvent by 2030. So those people are in the bakery and confectionery pension program in that for it. That fund, unless they make substantial changes to it, is expected to become insolvent by 2030. Now, if it were to become insolvent, then theoretically what would happen is that you would have the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation come in, and it would potentially pay some of that benefit, not necessarily all of it. Except there's one problem with that. The U.S. now has about 10 million people in about 1,400 PBGC insured employer pension plans. Of the 100 employer plans appear to be likely to fail within the next 20 years. So of those plans, there's an expectation that there's not going to be enough money there in the next 20 years to make those pension payments that they said they were going to do. The Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation, agency that insures the pension, only has about $2.2 billion in assets backing the employer plan. It needs roughly $67 billion to support the obligation of the participant. So if you are in the private sector and you have a pension, and that pension is part of the, for example, like the B and C program here, if it goes insolvent, the assumption is that this PBGC will come in to basically bail out for it. The problem is that the PBGC needs roughly about another $65 billion in it to make sure that it would have money there to be able to make those pension payments. Right? So therefore, the question then becomes, would there be a pension if there's no money in the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation to pay the benefits? Where would those benefits essentially come from? Right? So by Supreme Court ruling, a public pension is not considered a guarantee. Social Security is considered a benefit, and as such, benefits can be, by Supreme Court ruling, they can be reduced, eliminated, or changed at any point in time. So if a public pension were to default, it doesn't mean necessarily that there's anybody there to pay for it, right? Just like we're seeing Harvey with $1.4 million not being able to make it, how are they going to get funded for it, right? So the idea here is that we need to have a way to be able to start to look at other assets that we might have in case some of these situations were to arise, right? So there's Joe Manchin, Democrat of West Virginia, said, just real quick here, that in his state it affects roughly about 63,000 people are affected by the instability of the large multi-employer pension plan, where the coal miners is on track to fail in roughly 2022. So in his state, roughly 63,000 people in 4 years are going to be affected by a decrease in their pension benefits with the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation paying a certain amount out. And the other part is that most of the beneficiaries are minors. Plan are getting only about $500 a month, and most of those are widows. So the question would be, if the money's not there to be able to pay it, what happens with it? And it's estimated that the multi-employer pension plan is likely to become insolvent by 2025. So basically, about another 7 years, or counting, where those plans are not going to be solvent for it. So the question really becomes, when we start to look at our assets and our pools and that for it, not saying these plans are going to go defunct, the numbers don't look good on it for it, but we need to be in a position to be able to say, how are we going to have assets be able to be there and perform for us so that we've got other monies to be able to meet payments and that for it. So if that news wasn't good enough for you, so for a 65-year-old couple retiring today, what do you think the cost of their health insurance out-of-pocket cost would be for their estimated retirement? You said over a 20-year period, that would be the estimated length of time. What do you think the estimated cost is going to cost over that 20-year period of time? 1,400 times 20? Okay. So $700 per person over 20 years, we're talking $14,000. Okay. Any other ideas?
I'm gonna say 18.
18,000. Okay. You're all sitting down, right? Make sure everybody's sitting down when I give you these numbers, all right? So, a 65-year-old couple retiring in 2018 will need an estimated $280,000 to pay out-of-pocket health care costs during the couple's retirement years. I'm glad you were all sitting, okay? I don't need a defibrillator for anybody, do I? Okay.
Yes, I do.
The $280,000 figure assumes the couple qualifies for Medicare but does not require nursing home care. This annual forecast has risen from $225,000 in 2008. So in 10 years, the estimated cost for the health insurance cost has gone up by roughly $55,000, or roughly $5,000 a year, right? So I was with a couple last night. We were talking about their plan. They're 55 years old. They want to retire basically in 10 years. They don't have a lot of money set aside right now, so we're starting to put some numbers together for it. Between their property taxes, and if we use these figures of roughly $280,000, private retiree today for it, they would need roughly, just to cover their property taxes, and this number here, roughly $20,000 a year, just to cover those two expenses. That doesn't take into account lighting, gas, heat, water, food, anything like that. That's just those two expenses. And based on where their Social Security was going to be at, their Social Security combined was roughly about $30,000. So that meant that they would have roughly, that $30,000 is taxable, right? So they would have roughly $10,000, or about $800 a month at this point, for everything else, right? So obviously we had to have a heart-to-heart conversation about things that need to change to build, potentially have more money and be able to generate some more income in that, right? But these are the forecast numbers that are there for it, because, looking down the road, and especially if you might be in one of these plans, that's why I always encourage you, if you are part of a pension plan and that for it, that when you get your annual statement, you look at the funding level for it. All the plans have to say the funding level for it. You cannot control the funding level, but the funding level will give you an idea as to the solvency of what that pension is going to be, right? If the funding level like TRS shows at 42%, you know that you're probably not on the best side of the line, right? You're probably on the declining side, not necessarily on the increasing side, right? So at 42%, it's estimated that TRS will be out of money by roughly 2031, something like that, right? So if it's out of money, there's no money in it, then how are the pensions going to get paid, right? So it's always important to understand that, because that could lead us to have to look at other assets that you might have that we might need to put in a different location to be able to try and generate potential income and that sort of, right?
You said for Chicago Public Schools, it's 2034.
TRS. For Chicago CPS, I believe it's like 2034, 2035, something like that.
CPS is always 2019.
No, not 2019. No. The fireman fund might be. And those of you who are in Chicago who have property taxes, if you look at your property tax bill, there's the first installment, then there's a big middle part with a big grade in there for it. If you look at that grade portion in there for it, that will tell you the potential funding levels for each one of those pensions that are in there. The lowest one on there, there's what they call a general pension on it. That's funded at about 22%, I think, for it. That fund includes police and fire, but they don't break it out for it. The estimates for the Chicago Fireman's Fund, it's out of money, I think, in the next 3 or 4 years for it. And the question would be, what was the city going to do at that point in time to potentially pay those benefits and that for it, right? So you want to make sure that you've got an idea there. And kind of on that note of that 280,000, almost 2 out of every 3 American workers, 65%, believe that even if they continue to work until age 65, they will not accumulate enough savings to meet their retirement needs. All right. So, just looking at, basic numbers for it, if we have roughly $30,000 of income coming in from Social Security, and that's just covering basics, you need probably at least another $30,000 to be able to kind of live kind of comfortably, I'll say, right? So the question is, where is that other $30,000 going to come from at that point for it, right? Good news on it. Purdue University has announced as of 4/12/18 that it will keep in-state tuition at $9,992 for the 2019-2020 year. For in-state, not out-of-state. It's the 8th consecutive school year that Purdue has charged $9,992 for in-state tuition. That's good news. They got good news for it. So. And the average employer in the private sector pays 44 cents in benefits, Social Security, Medicare, employment insurance, workers' comp, life and health, paid leave, retirement plans for every dollar paid in salary. So basically 44% of every dollar that you're receiving, your employer is putting away for one of those particular benefits. Any questions so far? So I'll leave you on some good news here for it, right? So Los Angeles Dodgers baseball player Shahoni Antwani, okay, has won 2 games as a pitcher and hit 3 home runs from the plate in games through 4/26/18. Babe Ruth is the last major league player to win 10 games as a pitcher and hit 10 home runs in a single season. He did the feat in 1918. So it's been 100 years since anybody has come close to it, right? And Babe Ruth actually had World Series records as a pitcher in that for it before he became a hitter. So he's got some other things. So, any questions that I haven't addressed or issues or that for it? Yes. So the question is, on your property tax statement, if you're in the city of Chicago, the question is, can CPS increase those taxes at any point in time? And the answer is yes. There was a change in the law, I believe last year, that allows CPS to go in and separate, doesn't have to go through the alderman, city council, or anything like that. They can go ahead on their own, and they can impose and increase those taxes that are requested for education. So just pick a number, let's say it's $500, pick that as a number, all right? They can say we're gonna charge everybody $500 more on their property taxes. Doesn't have to go through city approval. Those funds go directly to CPS. All right. So I mean, so they do have some other kind of things that they can do that could potentially generate more, I call it revenue for them, right? As opposed to just the traditional that they have right now. Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you very much. We'll look forward to seeing you next month. You guys have a great day.